Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
It's coming up to midday here. It's Wednesday. Let's look at Big Ben. There it is. Rather lovely spring day here in London. That must mean Prime Minister's question's on its way and that Laura Kuenssberg is already here. And she is.
I am. Hello.
So, where does Mr. Corbyn start today?
It's quite difficult to know, isn't it? I mean, this is a big
Sometimes you can have too much choice.
Sometimes you can have too much choice. And sometimes, as we've seen over recent months, Jeremy Corbyn will decide on one subject and go through that rather doggedly. And we also know that he likes to stick to subjects that are his subjects. This week, he's got lots of choice. Does he do anything else on tax? Possibly. Labour feels that they really did make some ground, of course, in the sort of tax Panama fallout from the Panama Papers. And of course, it's quite interesting that, in a way, quite a few Labour MPs have said to me in the last couple of days, you know, that was good because it was something we could all unite around. And that felt different for them because so often since Jeremy Corbyn's been in charge, it's been a story of disunity and disharmony and things being slightly awkward, you know, sometimes between people at the top of the party.
Yeah, who on earth could you be
I don't know. I mean,
Well, just thinking about steel, personal independence payment and indeed tax. There's been a lot that we've been using.
But also, not just, you know, but the speed of the news cycle now just seems to me to get ever faster. We went into the Easter break with steel being the big domestic story and what could be done to save the country's steel industry. Then the Panama Papers came out of the blue and that dominated it. Then that transmogrified in this country into a story about tax returns.
Indeed.
And the kind of Panama Papers were kept behind. And now this morning we have John Whittingdale, press intrusion or lack of or whatever. I mean, it's quite difficult to keep up with all this.
Well, it is indeed, and perhaps it's sort of rather exhausting, and perhaps there's maybe there's a bit of a danger in all of that because it means that things happen so quickly that political parties are only just beginning to get their heads around they might actually do or not do about any particular issue before they've all moved on to the next thing. One thing I would say, though, in the background of all of this at the moment, which is why the difficulties on different fronts that the government is having, whether it is over tax or what's happened with John Whittingdale today, are important, is the backdrop of the EU referendum.
Yes.
That is creating a unique and very intense pressure on what the government is trying to do in the backdrop to everything right now.
It is indeed. Let's go straight to the comments.
Jeremy Corbyn!
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure the whole House will join me in mourning the death today of the dramatist Arnold Wesker, one of the great playwrights of this country, one of those wonderful angry young men of the 1950s, and like so many angry young people, actually changed the face of our country. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, the European Commission announced new proposals on country-by-country tax reporting so that companies must declare where they make their profits in the EU and in blacklisted tax havens. Conservative MEPs voted against the proposal for country-by-country reporting and against the blacklisting. Can the Prime Minister now assure us that Conservative MEPs will support the new proposal?
Well, first of all, let me join the right honourable gentleman in mourning the loss of the famous playwright and all the work that he did. He's quite right to mention that. Let me also welcome the country-by-country tax reporting proposal put forward by Commissioner Jonathan Hill, appointed by this government, the United Kingdom Commissioner. This is very much based on the work that we've been doing, leading the collaboration between countries of making sure that we share tax information. And as we discussed on Monday, this has gone far faster and far further under this government than under any previous government.
Mr. Speaker, if the proposals were put forward by the British government, why did Conservative MEPs then vote against them? There seems to be a bit of a disconnect here. The Panama Papers, Mr. Speaker, exposed the scandalous situation where wealthy individuals seem to believe that corporation tax and other taxes are something optional. Indeed, as the member for Rutland and Melton informed us, it's only for low achievers, apparently. So when the HMRC says that the tax gap is £34 billion, why then is he cutting HMRC staff by 20% and cutting down tax offices, which loses the expertise of people to close that tax gap?
Well, I'm glad he wants to get on to our responsibilities to pay our taxes. I think that's very important. I thought his tax return was a metaphor for Labour policy. It was late, it was chaotic, it was inaccurate, it was uncosted. That's exactly Turning to the specific questions, he's absolutely right. He's absolutely right to identify the tax gap, and that is why we closed off loopholes in the last Parliament, equivalent of £12 billion. We aim to close off loopholes in this Parliament, equivalent to £16 billion. So the HMRC is taking very strong action, backed by this government, backed by the Chancellor, legislated for by this House, and I think I'm right in saying that since 2010, we've put actually over £1 billion into HMRC to increase its capabilities to collect the tax that people should be paying. The difference, I think, between this side of the House and the right honourable gentleman is we believe in setting low tax rates and encouraging people to pay them, and it's working.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to the Prime Minister for drawing attention to my own tax return. There, warts and all, the warts being my handwriting, all being my generous donation to HMRC. I actually paid more tax than some companies owned by people that he might know quite well. The Prime Minister isn't... Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister isn't cutting tax abuse, he's cutting down on tax collectors. The tax collected helps to fund our NHS and all the other services. Last month, the OBR reported that HMRC doesn't have the necessary resources to tackle offshore tax disclosures. The government is committed to taking £400 million out of HMRC's budget by 2020. Will he now commit to reversing that cut so that we can collect the tax that will help to pay for the services?
I'm afraid his figures, rather like his tax return, his figures aren't entirely accurate. At the summer budget 2015, we gave an extra £800 million to HMRC to fund additional work to tackle tax evasion and non-compliance between now and 2021. This is going to enable HMRC to recover a cumulative £7.2 billion in tax over the next 5 years. And we've already brought in more than £2 billion from offshore tax evaders since 2010. But the point I'd make to him, I think we should try and bring some consensus to this issue. For years in this country, Labour governments and Conservative governments had an attitude to the Crown dependencies in the overseas territories that their tax affairs were a matter for them, and their compliance affairs were a matter for them, and their transparency was a matter for them. This government has changed that. We got the overseas territories, we got the Crown dependencies round the table. We said you've got to have registers of ownership, you've got to collaborate with the UK government, you've got to make sure people don't hide their taxes, and it's happening. So when he gets to his feet, he should welcome the fact that huge progress has been made, raising taxes, sorting out the overseas territories and Crown dependencies, closing the tax gap, getting businesses to pay more, giving international leadership to this whole issue, all things that never happened under Labour.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Prime Minister for that answer. The only problem with it is that the Red Book states HMRC spending will fall from £3.3 billion to £2.9 billion by 2020. And in regard to UK Crown dependencies and overseas territories, only 2 days ago the Prime Minister said that he had agreed that they will provide, these are the overseas territories, they will provide UK law enforcement and tax agencies with full access to information on the beneficial ownership of companies. There seems to be some confusion here because the Chief Minister of Jersey said this is in response to a need for information without delay where terrorist activities are involved. Obviously, we welcome his commitment to fighting terrorism, but is Jersey and all the other dependencies actually going to provide beneficial ownership information or not?
The short answer to that is yes, they are. And that is what's such a big breakthrough. Look, I totally accept they're not going as far as us because we are publishing a register of beneficial ownership. That will happen in June. We'll be one of the only countries in the world to do so. I think Norway and Spain are the others. What the overseas territories and crown dependencies are doing is making sure that we have full access to registers of beneficial ownership to make sure that people aren't evading or avoiding their taxes. Now, in the interests of giving full answers to his questions, let me give him the figures for full-time equivalents in HMRC in terms of compliance. The numbers are going from 25,000 in 2010 to 26,798 in 2015. It's not how much money you spend on an organisation, it's how many people you can actually have out there collecting the taxes and making sure the forms are properly filled in.
Jeremy Corbyn! Well, the Prime Minister is quite right. The number of people out there collecting taxes is important. Therefore, why has he laid off so many staff of HMRC who therefore cannot collect those taxes? In 2013, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister demanded that the overseas territories rip aside the cloak of secrecy by creating a public register of beneficial ownership of information. Will he now make it clear that the beneficial ownership register will be an absolutely public document, transparent for all to see who really owns these companies and whether they're paying their taxes or not?
Let me be absolutely clear. For the United Kingdom, we have taken the unprecedented step, never done by Labour, never done previously by Conservatives, of an open beneficial ownership register. With the Crown dependencies and overseas territories, they have to give full access to the registers of beneficial ownership. We did not choose the option of forcing them to have a public register because we believed if that was the case, we get into the situation that he spoke about, is some of them might have walked away from this cooperation altogether. That's the point. The question is, are we going to be able to access the information? Yes. Are we going to be able to pursue tax evaders? Yes. Did any of these things happen under a Labour government? No.
Jeremy Corbyn! Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister does talk very tough, and I grant him that. The only problem is, it's not a public register that he's offering us. He's only offering us a private register that some people can see. And it's quite interesting that the Premier of the Cayman Islands, Alden McLaughlin, is today apparently celebrating his victory over the Prime Minister because he is saying the information certainly will not be available publicly or available directly by any UK or non-Cayman Islands agency. The Prime Minister is supposed to be chasing down tax evasion and tax avoidance. He's supposed to be bringing it all into the open. If he cannot even persuade the Premier of the Cayman Islands or Jersey to open up their books, where is the tough talk bringing the information we need to collect the taxes that should pay for the services that people need?
I think he's misunderstanding what I've said. In terms of the UK, it is an absolute first in terms of a register of beneficial ownership that is public. They keep saying it's not public. The British one will be public. Further to that, and I think this is important because it goes to a question asked by the Right Honourable Member for Tottenham, we're also saying to foreign companies that have dealings with Britain that they have to declare their properties and the properties they own, which will remove a huge veil of secrecy over the ownership, for instance, of London property. Now, I am not saying we've completed all this work, but we've got more tax information exchange, more registers of beneficial ownership, more chasing down tax evasion and avoidance, more money recovered from businesses and individuals, and all of these things are things that have happened under this government. The truth is, he's running to catch up because Labour did nothing in 13 years.
That's all, folks.
I've been